This is the real story of the Titanic in just 10 minutes. The ship was not an unsinkable ship. It had many safety features, but it wasn't meant to survive being hit by an iceberg. The author, Morgan Robertson, wrote The Wreck of Titan, which is exactly the same as the Titanic story, but he wrote it 14 years before the Titanic sank. He wrote it after hearing about a ship called the Titan that sank because it hit an iceberg. So he wrote this fictional story, The Wreck of Titan, which is basically the exact same story as the Titanic, but he wrote it 14 years before the Titanic sank. In 1911, an author named Morgan Robertson wrote a fictional story about a ship called Titan. The story is about a ship that has its launch delayed due to bad weather, then hits an iceberg and sinks. It's a very similar story to the sinking of the Titanic. And what's really strange is that he wrote this story 14 years before the Titanic sank. I think there's something else that's also very interesting about this story. I think it's actually more interesting than the fact that he predicted the sinking of the Titanic. What's really strange is that he predicted the details of the sinking of the Titanic. For example, he wrote that the ship would have lifeboats, but they would be full of people so they couldn't be used. And he also said that the captain tried to warn other ships about the iceberg, but they didn't listen. These things are crazy because they happened with the Titanic. Some people say that Morgan Robertson predicted the sinking of the Titanic because he saw a vision of the future. But others say that he just wrote a fictional story that happened to be the same as the sinking of the Titanic. There were some other predictions that he made that didn't come true, like how the ship would have life rafts, but these were never used. So here's my theory. I think that Morgan Robertson didn't see a vision of the future or anything crazy like that. I think he heard about a ship called Titan that sank because it hit an iceberg. And he thought this story would be really interesting for a book, so he wrote it down. The reason why some of his predictions came true and some did not is because he did not make all of them up. Some of them were true, like how the captain tried to warn other ships, but some of them weren't true, like how the lifeboats were full of people. On April 15, 1912, the Titanic was sailing across the Atlantic Ocean from England to New York. There were around 2,200 people on board, including crew members and passengers. It was a very normal day until around 11:40 p.m. when the Titanic hit an iceberg. This caused a hole in the ship, and the water started leaking in. When this happened, the crew members started pumping water out of the ship, trying to keep it from sinking. Meanwhile, passengers started being told that everything was fine. They even had a lifeboat drilled to prepare the passengers in case there was an emergency. Most people thought this was just a precaution, because it was likely that the ship could be saved. But as time passed, it became clear that the Titanic was going to sink. The crew members were told to get into the lifeboats so they could escape, and at around 1:30 a.m., the captain gave the order to abandon ship. The passengers got into the lifeboats and onto the life rafts. There were flares shot into the sky to signal for help. One of the passengers, a man named Robert Hykins, said that he felt the ship tilt and he looked outside. This is what he saw. At around 3:30 a.m., the captain gave the order for the passengers and crew members to start singing and playing music to keep their spirits up. While all of this was happening, there was a nearby ship called the Captain Smith. The captain of this ship saw the flares, but he assumed that these were fireworks. He only realized the next morning that they were SOS signals. If he had realized this, he could have saved many of the passengers and crew members, but unfortunately, he didn't. Around 4:10 a.m., the Titanic broke in half and most of the lifeboats were destroyed. The passengers and crew members jumped into the water, and most of them died within a few minutes because of the cold temperature. Around 8:50 a.m., the Captain Smith finally realized that they were SOS signals. He went over to the life rafts and started rescuing the survivors. In total, 706 people were rescued, but an estimated 1,445 people died. So now, let me tell you a little bit about some of the survivors. One of the survivors was a woman named Molly Brown. She was one of the richest passengers on the Titanic, but she gave away most of her money to charity. She survived by getting into a lifeboat and then helping others get into lifeboats. She was known for being very selfless during the sinking of the Titanic. Another survivor was a lifeboat crew member named Frederick Fleet. He was one of the first people to spot the iceberg, but he didn't realize that it was an iceberg until it was too late. He tried to warn the captain, but by the time they turned the ship, it was already too late. And the last person I want to talk about is a man named Jack Thayer. He was one of the wealthiest men on the Titanic, but he chose to travel in a lower-class cabin in order to be closer to the crew members. He did this so he could learn about shipbuilding. He survived by getting into a lifeboat and then helping others get into lifeboats. He was known for being very brave during the sinking of the Titanic. Now, every year on April, people around the world remember the passengers and crew members who died. Many people visit the Titanic Museum or watch documentaries about the sinking of the Titanic. They do this to honor the victims and to remember those who died. And that's the end of the video. Now, here's what I want you to do. Comment below your favorite character. Don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.